a lawyer in the Army. And look, I want them to have every opportunity. I don't want any nonsense. I don't want any Me Too situations from senior officers. So I'm all about, as a JAG officer, I went after commanders that wrongfully use their influence with female subordinates. So we need women in the military. We need them trained well. But I want the best of the best. I want the best female pilots. I want the best male pilots. I want whoever flies the jet the best should be flying the jet to defend America.
How about Secret Service officers? Is it fair to criticize their performance and the existence of them like we've seen this week after the assassination?
So I think what's fair is to talk about quotas. We don't want quotas in America, but I was defended. The lead of my detail was a female officer. She was amazing. She took care of me for 2 years, and she was a tough gal. And trust me, she could have picked me up and carried me, and she would have beat anybody in a gunfight. And I was always happy to have her. She had my six, and I was grateful for her. So, but again, she wasn't a diversity pick. She was a pick because she was the best person for the job, and that's what we want. But when we start putting quotas on, say 30% or 40%, it have to be female or African American or white or whatever the quota is, that's where we get into trouble. The great thing about America, and this is a J.D. Vance story, is we should be able to raise ourselves up from whatever station we are, whatever color we are, whether you're Mormon like me or Jewish or Catholic or Muslim. If you're the best at what you do, you should be able to rise to the top. And that's what America's about. That's what I believe America's about. And it's not about quotas and having this person take this job. We're not Lebanon, where the prime minister has to be a Shia and the president has to be a Christian and the Speaker of the House has to be a Sunni Muslim, or I got that wrong. I think the Speaker of the House in Lebanon has to be a Shia, and the Prime Minister has to be a Sunni, and the President has to be a Christian. We shouldn't have that in America. That's not who we are. We should have the best people, men, women, black, white, whoever, in the job. Let them rise to the occasion.
Okay. We're going to do a lightning round for the rest of the world. We're about 8 minutes left. And so thank you for going through all that on the domestic politics side. NATO. The NATO summit just wrapped up last week. We heard a lot. A couple of specific questions I had for you. One is on Article 5. And the idea and the reporting that we've heard that somehow Article 5 needs to change, or that President Trump wants it to change, perhaps to tie it, either implicitly or explicitly to whether countries are paying their minimum 2%. Should Article 5 change? Is the age that it's automatically ironclad over?
Well, Article 5 has never been ironclad. It's always been, if one country is invaded, there'll be a council of the Atlantic Council to decide how to respond. That it's been interpreted as a collective response. I think it should be a collective response, and it should remain the same. But what we can't have any longer, the American people are the most generous people in the history of the world. We've supported Europe and supported their rise and defended them from Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. We defended them from the Soviet Union for decades and decades. The Europeans have to pay their fair share. They have to be as invested in their own security as the American taxpayer. So you've got a country like Germany that runs a budget surplus and trades with us and makes a fortune selling Mercedes and BMWs here. They have a generous social program. Why shouldn't they pay for their military? Why should the American taxpayer, and we're in debt up to our ears, $30, $40 trillion in debt. Every family in this country owes hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Why should we pay for the German defense?
We understand the pressure, but if until those numbers change in the way that President Trump would like to see, should people in places like North Macedonia feel or worry that the United States won't have their backs? If a Russian tank crosses that border, that 1-inch phrase that we hear, will the United States not be there?
The United States has been there for Europe. We were there before, and there was no attack in Europe. And the Javelin missiles that the Ukrainians had to defend themselves against the initial Russian attack, that came from us, not from Barack Obama, not from Joe Biden. It came from President Trump. So they know we're there for them. They want a muscular, tough foreign policy. They want a strong American leader. But at the same time, what President Trump's point was, you got to pay your fair share, and that's why we got $400 billion in additional NATO spending at that 2019 summit when he was talking about things like paying your dues and paying up. We got the spending, and that spending is keeping Europe safer.
You mentioned Richard Grenell during the summit, or maybe before. He put out a note, or I think on Twitter, saying after Mark Rutte was tapped to be the next SecGen, that Rutte is a no for Trump. Trump will pick the next SecGen when he enters office in January. Is that right? Do you agree with that?
Look, Rick is a great guy. He's a good friend of mine. He's a very astute diplomat. But my position is, having been his national security advisor and having spent a lot of time with President Trump, nobody speaks for President Trump except for Donald J. Trump. And anyone who presumes to speak for Donald Trump.
Well, you speak to Trump, though. Should Mark Rutte worry that he's not going to be sitting in Brussels come?
I haven't had that conversation with the president. If I had, I wouldn't tell you. I was always very discreet
I won't take offense to that. That's okay.
It's not because I don't like you, Kevin. My position is I never talked about, unlike some former national security advisors, I never talked about the advice I gave the president.
We'll move on to Ukraine. You have a long piece out in Foreign Affairs Journal right now explaining your worldview on a lot of issues on Ukraine. One of the things you mentioned is, you write, is Trump's approach would be to continue to provide lethal aid to Ukraine, financed by European countries, while keeping the door open to diplomacy and keeping Moscow off balance with a degree of unpredictability. That part, what does that mean?
Look, what it means is when President Trump was in office, Vladimir Putin didn't know what we'd do if he invaded Ukraine. If he invaded Ukraine, there was a chance the U.S. Marine Corps would go in. Small chance, but the chance was there. And so he didn't invade Ukraine because he didn't want the U.S. Marine Corps to come in and defeat his forces. That's the sort of unpredictability. But when you have Joe Biden say, well, if it's a minor incursion, we might be okay with that. If you just take a little bit of Ukraine territory, that might be okay. That's not the kind of uncertainty we need. We need the uncertainty of a strong American leader, keeping our adversaries off balance, and having a powerful American military that can respond. And that way we complicate the lives of the planners. When the Russian generals are sitting around thinking about what they want to do, I want them to think, what would happen if American F-22s came and dominated the airspace, and they had air supremacy over us? We'd be wiped out.
So you just want to unleash the rules a little more, so that it's more unpredictable
100%.
for Moscow.
And look, that happened. Remember?
So are you for allowing Zelensky to fire deeper into Russia?
Look, I don't want to comment on that issue because I think it's a complicated issue. But what I can comment on is that we've been too little too late with all the weapons we've given Zelensky. Every time the Ukrainians were on the verge of winning and getting their territory back, we prevented them from getting the Polish MiGs. I talked to the Polish foreign minister. They were prepared early in the war to give them Polish MiGs. We said no. F-16s, they came but too little too late. HIMARS, ATACMS. Everything's been too little too late. So I think we haven't done a good. I applaud the Biden folks for giving aid to Ukraine, but it's always been a half step too late.
I encourage everyone to read the rest of what he thinks about Ukraine in his article. For now, I'm going to move you on to China. You, in that same piece, say that the United States should decouple with China. I could do 30 minutes just on this, but the one point I want to ask you about is I've heard plenty of security professionals left and right calling for the awakening of China as a threat and what's to be done about it. What I'm curious about is how you convince other people outside of the bubble to do the same. So just in the last few days, Elon Musk has come out saying he supports President Trump. He will endorse him officially, but as we know, Elon Musk has been to China twice. He's been trying hard to work with the Xi regime to do business. Should President Trump reject Elon Musk's endorsement?
No, I think he should take Elon Musk's endorsement. I think he's one of the great American, great South African American, and he's done a.
So you can be a good American and still do business with China?
So my point about decoupling from China is that China has decoupled from us. It's not a question of us decoupling from China. China has said under their China 2025 policy, they want to control AI, they want to control quantum computing, they want to control computer chips, they want to control telecom, they want to control space, EVs, and autonomous vehicles, all by 2025. They're not going to get there. We've got to make sure they don't. We've got to make sure they don't have the monopoly on rare earth elements like they do now. We've got to bring manufacturing back to America and be independent from the Chinese. We can never have a position like we did at the outset of COVID, where the Chinese controlled the PPE, the masks, the gowns that we wore, the ventilators, the antibiotics. We can never be in a position where we're dependent on Xi Jinping for our existence, and that's what I mean by decoupling.
I'll get you for another time on China. I'd like to get more into that. But for our last minute on hostages, we did want to make sure to get a question to you on that as a former hostage negotiating leader. What is it going to take to get the 5 Americans out of Gaza?
Well, what I've been concerned about with Gaza from the start, we've got a great military that's got special rescue teams, Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, that were designed after the 1980 fiasco in Iran when we were unable to rescue our hostages there. They were designed to rescue hostages. That was their first order of business for Delta and SEAL Team 6. We should have deployed them on day one and put Hamas at risk. When ISIS took American hostages, when Al-Qaeda took American hostages, at the end of the Trump administration when JNIM, an al-Qaeda affiliate in Africa, took hostages. We sent the SEALs and we rescued Walton.
Yeah, but it takes like a perfect scenario before those groups get sent in for all the reasons that's dangerous for the hostages themselves, and in the middle of Gaza, what's going on? Is it going to require some sort of a cessation or a reduction of fighting on the Israeli side to open up that window? Is that something that's needed?
Well, what should happen is Hamas should release the hostages unconditionally, and we ought to let Hamas know, like Ronald Reagan did with the splinter Palestinian groups back in the 1980s. If you take American hostages, if you kill Americans, you can run, but you can't hide. We're going to get you. And there are Hamas leaders all over there in Egypt, they're in Qatar, they're in the tunnels in Gaza. They ought to know that if they take Americans and kill Americans, we're coming after them. Instead, the Biden administration negotiates with them like they're some sort of NGO, non-governmental organization, or a legitimate political party. These guys are terrorists. They're as bad as ISIS. I just got back from Israel. I went and saw the sites where the toddlers were killed, where the families were killed and executed, burned alive, raped, unspeakable harm done to them. That can never happen again, and Hamas needs to know that unequivocally that there's a price to pay if you take Americans. And I think if we let them know that, I bet the American hostages would be released right away.
Do you think there's still a chance to send in hostage rescue teams, or is that passed at the beginning of the conflict?
Look, there's always a chance to send in hostage rescue teams. Our capabilities are exquisite.
Ambassador Ryan, we are out of time, unfortunately. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much. And to everyone, we're going to take another 5-minute break before our programming continues. So thank you for joining us in person and online from Milwaukee.
Thank you, Kevin.
Please welcome tech lobbying and influence reporter, Brendan Bordelon, Indiana Republican Party's Director of Diversity and Engagement, Whitley Yates, Chairman of the New York State Young Republicans, Peter Junta, and Milwaukee County Republicans, Hilario De Leon.
I should have said I was the chairman, though. That's okay. That's it, yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Brendan Bordelon. I'm the tech lobbying and influence reporter at Politico. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm kind of parachuting in today on the politics side. Very excited for this. It's going to be really an adventure. So most of our conversations this week have been focused on the current state of the Republican Party and its leaders. But we really wanted to take a second to carve out some time to focus on the future of the GOP, where the party is headed. And we thought, obviously, the best thing that we could do for that front is talk to some young Republicans and see where they want to see the GOP go and where things might be headed for the next decades to come past this November election. Before we get started, though, obviously, we have to talk about and acknowledge Saturday's horrific assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump at a rally in Pennsylvania. Of course, Donald Trump was injured, and one person was killed. 2 others were critically wounded. This, obviously, is just happened. I want to, briefly talk with each of you about your response to the attack and how you have seen other young Republicans and folks in the party respond to what happened on Saturday.
I'll say for me, witnessing a heinous act of violence specifically geared towards a political leader in this time just seems completely asinine. The fact that we cannot disagree with decorum and have our own political thoughts and ideologies and be able to understand that it's okay if you are not in lockstep with everyone is just a sad reality in this country.
Peter.
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with you. Being a New Yorker, we tend to be a little more tougher when we throw jabs at our political opponents, but I think in general, it is common belief amongst everybody that our politics have become a little bit too heated, to say the least. But I do think that, if anything, a positive out of all of this is that it's going to bring people back to the center on the tone of their rhetoric and hopefully on the temperature of the conversation they're having.
Yeah. Hillary.
So I was watching, actually, the rally live when the shooting happened. And immediately, I just jaw dropped. I was just shocked. It was absolutely terrible what happened. But, a little bit later, it was very inspirational to see President Trump stand up and show the rally goers, fist pumping in the air, fight, fight, fight. That was, they could have easily rushed him off the stage and stuff, but he wanted to show the American people that he was right, or that he was all right. And one of the things that really came to my mind when that shooting took place was a tweet, actually, that he put out back in December of 2020. And the tweet said, "I just want to stop the world from killing itself." And the fact that, someone tried to kill him, the heated rhetoric on, again, both sides, it's great to see the country kind of coming together and uniting and saying, all right, let's tone it down. We need to come back to, common sense and just have civil discussion. My phone was blowing up nonstop after that shooting. I didn't get to bed till like 3 in the morning. I'm absolutely exhausted, still recovering. And, I think here at the convention, we're going to really see a message of unity come from President Trump and also the other leaders within the Republican Party.
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably had trouble sleeping that night. It is worth noting that the FBI is still trying to determine a motive of the shooter. We know very little at this point. But to contextualize Saturday's shooting, it really is only the latest in a historic wave of increased violence, political violence in the United States. So in a little over a decade, we've seen former Representative Gabby Giffords, Representative Steve Scalise, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, and now obviously former President Trump, all fall victim to these types of politically motivated attacks. Are you guys concerned that this is going to continue, particularly as in the run-up to November? How likely do you see follow-on attacks, increased violence? Is that a major concern for you? Whitley?
I'm going to be honest, it wasn't a major concern prior to this because it wasn't something that I ever foresaw. I think, you know, in the grand scheme of civility and democracy, I don't think that polarization should lead to assassination or assassination attempts. And so knowing that our society has gotten to this place, you know, it's disappointing, but I think that the decorum is going to be raised based upon the past decisions and the way in which President Trump is coming out of this as a survivor and pushing for unity, and you're seeing that unity to cross party lines as well.
You're talking about unity, and I understand, obviously, there's a desire for that, I think, across the political spectrum. Earlier, one of the panels talked about President Trump's a post that he put out this morning saying that in the wake of the attack, all of the other issues going on within the legal issues should be thrown out, taking some jabs at the left. There are some Republican lawmakers who, again, you know, without evidence at this point, have blamed Biden, President Biden, and the Democrats, some Democratic lawmakers for sort of potentially inciting this attack with some of their rhetoric about the threat posed by Donald Trump. I'm curious about, you know, particularly as young Republicans, you guys have to live in this space for a long time, longer than the rest of us working in politics. I mean, is that helpful to sort of rush out and blame the other side? Do you guys feel like the Democrats do have some blame here, given their rhetoric? I guess I'll go with Peter, and then it looks like Hilary.
Yeah, I think the rhetoric has a lot to do with it. And I'm not going to say that Republicans are innocent, but if you look at the messaging that Democrats, not just Joe Biden, but Democrats have been using for the past 8 years, really, since President Trump had first taken office, it has been largely negative. It has been incredibly aggressive, and there are even some people who, outside of the political world, in celebrities. I think of Kathy Griffin with the severed head of Donald Trump that she had,
Yep.
right? And so, look, I personally haven't seen any Republican use language that says Joe Biden did this, the blood is on his hands, because I don't think that is a sensible or serious answer. But I do think that at the end of the day, it is very fair for Republicans to turn around, and honestly for Americans to turn around and say, this is because of the rhetoric being used by Joe Biden and people on the left. And again, I'll go an extra step here and say, you know, we've seen this coming. Again, I'm in New York. We've had protests now since before COVID for various issues, each of them increasingly more violent than the last, where vehicles are being vandalized, businesses are being vandalized, people are being injured, and thank God nobody's been killed yet. But again, these are people who believe passionately about issues that are ultimately in the political sphere, and they are going out into the streets and committing crimes. And so when we talk about the rhetoric, that has to do with it as well. And I think what happened on Saturday was a product of that.
Peter's 100% right. I mean, words are very powerful, and they can definitely cause people on whatever side that they're on to do things that they probably should not be doing. We saw it, many cases, you know, for me, when I was in high school, and I was the only Trump supporter in school, they called me racist, they called me, you know, a Nazi, they called me all kinds of names. That is the same kind of rhetoric that, you know, Peter touched on, that we kept hearing from people in the media. We kept hearing from people in Hollywood. We kept hearing from people at these protests, these riots in Kenosha. They burnt down Kenosha, not all of Kenosha, but places in Kenosha during the George Floyd protests that were going on. There was riots there. I know people that were down there, and people said it was a mostly peaceful protest. People lost their businesses. So the rhetoric on all sides, again, it has to come down, but they have to recognize that, you know, although they're all starting to come out and say, you know, we gotta have unity, they do have to understand that, yes, words matter, and words are very powerful, and they have to recognize that they don't, again, no blood on their hands, but their words do influence people.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing from all three of you, it sounds like, is a desire for the temperature to be turned down on both sides,
Yes.
with both campaigns. Obviously, former President Trump has, I think, a reputation of saying quite divisive and at times potentially inciting things as well. You guys obviously have concerns with the Democratic Party's rhetoric, President Biden's rhetoric. You guys probably have a little more influence on the Republican side of the aisle. To what extent are you guys, as young Republicans, willing to go to the Trump campaign, go to your fellow Republicans and say, you know, it's on us to turn down the temperature? And I guess, you know, to the extent that you guys would like to see messaging change in either campaign, how? I mean, because you still need to draw a distinction between your opponent, both sides, right? I mean, how do you sort of square that circle, or you know, make sure that you're triangulating correctly, where you can, you know, put the stakes on the line about the election on either side, while still saying, you know, there is a limit to acceptable discourse to avoid this kind of violence?
I think, Brendan, the truth is that both sides have been known to engage with rage. And there's one thing to speak truth to power, and then there's another thing to utilize that rhetoric to inflict harm upon people and assault people. I think that both sides really need to understand that rhetoric has resonance, and the resonance that you're creating in the lives of those that are following your campaign, or even those that are against your campaign, can materialize into real problems. And so I think it's incumbent upon both parties as leaders to decide, you know, to disagree with decorum and keep respect at the front.
Yeah. This is a heavy topic. We have some other things to talk about, and I especially want to talk about this one issue because I'm a technology reporter, despite this being a political panel, and it would be totally remiss of me, having 3 young Republicans in front of me right now, to not talk about TikTok, which is the favorite social media application, really for the entire country, but including Gen Z in particular, I think. There's 170 million monthly users, American users of the app, and young people, again, like I said, are particularly prolific users, posters. Everybody loves TikTok, except for Washington. TikTok is obviously owned by a Chinese company, and a wide swath of lawmakers in both parties, I would say actually especially the Republican Party though, are very concerned about those ties. They see, I think, potential privacy risks to people using TikTok, and I think they also see concerns about frankly, propaganda, and you know, the idea that the Chinese government is somehow tied to this app and is pushing these messages, anti-American messages, maybe other issues that could weaken the country. It was those worries that drove Congress to overwhelmingly pass legislation earlier this year that could lead to a ban on TikTok. President Biden has his own concerns, security and otherwise, with the app, and he signed that law this spring. Trump, interestingly, actually got the ball rolling on the TikTok ban. In 2020, he signed an executive order that was later overturned by the courts, but it was seeking to ban the app entirely. He's kind of changed his tune recently, though. It's been interesting. He told Charlie Kirk, a conservative personality, a few months ago that he was, what was the exact quote, he will never ban TikTok. It seemed like a pretty transparent attempt to kind of like curry favor with young voters and maybe just voters generally. So I want to ask you guys, as young people, or people that talk a lot with young voters, is TikTok an issue in this election? I mean, there's a question about it being sort of a vehicle to get your election message out there, but there's also the question of the ban, right? And if one side's going to ban it, the other isn't, is that more likely, less likely to attract voters? Is President Biden's support of a ban, does that put him at risk, particularly with young voters, given the fact that Trump has come out and said he will not ban it? I guess we'll start with Peter.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't personally use TikTok. I think people can use it if they want. I'm on other social media apps, and I don't have time for another one. But I do think that there is definitely truth to the belief that, sure, there might be young people that are frustrated over it at the end of the day if it's banned. I personally wouldn't advise banning it, but I do think that instead the conversation should shift to, and you would appreciate this as a tech reporter, American innovation, right? Where's some US companies' response to TikTok? And I get, okay, fine, Facebook, Meta, they have Instagram, they have Reels. I'm sure that at some point we will see something similar on X. But what are we doing to support American companies that are creating technologies that are going to be used here in the United States, where we don't have to then worry about those technologies being used to spy on us?
Hilario, you told me earlier you are on TikTok.
I am.
I think
on
you're
TikTok.
actually the only Gen Z, actual Gen Z on the panel.
I am. Yeah.
So that makes that tracks. Could you tell me? I mean, do you think your fellow Gen Zers are going to vote against the guy who wants to ban TikTok? Is that an issue?
So originally, I was in favor of the ban, but that's because I wasn't familiar with TikTok. I think people have to get familiar with it and kind of see how the app works. And I actually sat down, I went through it, and I was able to see that I didn't really see propaganda being pushed, that like some people are, the rhetoric that's saying that the Chinese are pushing propaganda. And I think that's what President Trump was able to see. He was able to sit down, he was able to review it, and he realized that this is a tool. You know, any campaign, any political candidate, anyone who's running for office, or anyone like us, young Republicans who are trying to be, help influence the next generation that's clearly coming in and going to be one of the largest generations, that is going to be a very huge voting demographic that could make or break elections. How can we influence those people with our policies, our message, et cetera, et cetera? And so that's why I'm on TikTok. I'm on X, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. But being on TikTok, you can take just a few second video about what you're doing. Being the county party chair here in Milwaukee, I'm able to highlight for people on TikTok everything that's going on right now here at the Republican National Convention. So that's very exciting. I've talked with a lot of young people, Generation Z. To me, I don't think they're as concerned about the social media aspect as they are more concerned about issues like the economy, having to work more than 2 jobs to put food on the table, having to ensure that they're safe in their homes and safe in their neighborhoods, trying to make sure. A lot of people are worried about the threat of World War III. We don't want to be drafted. There hasn't been a draft since the Vietnam War, and God hopes there's never another draft. But those are concerns that people are concerned about. But I think that they're going to look at President Trump and they're going to be grateful that he doesn't want to ban it, and he's going to actually get on there and interact with it and take his message directly to the people.
So you see the TikTok focus as a bit of a distraction, maybe from like much bigger issues that the party should tackle.
I agree. Yeah, 100%. It's important. It's 100% important, but there's so many other issues right now that are facing our country that we have to take care of.
And it does put Trump and congressional Republicans, I think, at odds with each other, because the vast majority of congressional Republicans voted for this. I think maybe certainly before Trump said he would never ban TikTok. So I don't know.
I think they should get on it. I think they should check it out, sit down. They should have a day of TikTok day at the Congress.
Yeah, and if Trump does become president again, are you guys worried or concerned, excited about the potential that there's going to be a split in the party on this issue? I mean, obviously the party is increasingly anti-China, I think, in its policies. TikTok is sort of a centerpiece of that. If President Trump does take office and decides to keep his word and stop a ban, does that put congressional Republicans who supported this in a tough spot?
I don't think it puts them in a tough spot, because we're honestly talking about a symptom and not the root cause. And TikTok is just a symptom of something that this nation has been grappling with, which is cybersecurity and data privacy. And these issues is what's at the core of even wanting to ban such an app. And when it comes to the propaganda that you mentioned earlier, did this propaganda help push the polarization that could have led to an assassination attempt, are all questions I think that Congress needs to look at. And if it's not a ban that's necessary, I am on TikTok, my daughter's on TikTok, I'm learning all the dances and challenges. And I definitely think that it is something that is necessary to continue to almost have like the town square, and to continue to allow the free flow of thoughts and ideas, as long as it's safe for us as citizens, as long as our data is safe, and as long as there isn't a cybersecurity threat that allows for China to invade our homes through our phones, and utilize that to not only impact harm upon Americans, but do other ills in the world.
And there's a lot of people in Washington that agree with you that this is part of a broader conversation about data privacy. There have been efforts to pass data privacy legislation in Congress for years. Those efforts have gone nowhere. But the TikTok ban has gone somewhere, so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, especially, I think, if President Trump returns to office next year. Let's switch gears. We're going to talk climate change. So this is another issue that I think energizes young voters, including young Republican voters, in a way that maybe a lot of other issues do not. I'm going to quote from a Pew poll that was conducted last summer, which found that younger Republicans are much more likely than older and more conservative Republicans to describe climate change as at least a somewhat serious problem, and to say human activity plays a role. It's worth noting the GOP platform that was adopted last week by the party does not mention climate change once. It is completely silent on that. It's a pretty long document, but never goes there. Do you guys hear from young Republicans about this issue? I mean, is this something that is talked about, and is there concern at the direction of the party on this issue? Should the GOP writ large pay more attention to this and maybe come up with some policies to ideally ameliorate the warming climate?
I think climate change in this context is a buzzword that's just used to describe a larger set of issues, right? And so I disagree with you that it wasn't mentioned at all in the GOP platform, because at the end of the day, we have in there a set of policy proposals that would push us further towards American energy independence, which has been core to Trump's agenda since his first term in office, right?
I do think it talks about nuclear. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are Republicans that are big nuclear proponents. I'm not going to sit here and try to masquerade as an expert on the issue, but I do think that if we're going to talk about climate change, and increasingly as young people, the one thing I hear about is energy independence, right? And Trump, the last time he was president, it always comes up in conversation how cheap gas prices were, right? Because we were able, for the most part, to control our own resources. But I think on a larger issue of climate change, I mean, I'll just remind you that the greatest conservationist that ever sat in the White House was Teddy Roosevelt, and he was a Republican. And there are a lot of Republicans that still hold those same ideals of preserving land. I think you go anywhere out in the Midwest, and you'll pretty much find people that are of that mentality. And for some reason, both the media, but I would say especially those on the left, have portrayed people that support fracking or oil production of any kind to be, anti-conservationists, and it's just further from the truth.
Hilario, do you feel like, I think particularly as Gen Z becomes more prominent in the Republican Party, I mean, just inevitably as time marches on and people retire, are we likely to see a changing message on either climate specifically, or, to Peter's point, broader issues about energy conservation?
Well, I think with President Trump, if reelected, we would go back to returning to a lot of policies that he put forth during his administration. There's a lot of projects that he talked about and initiatives that he put forward. One of those being the Great Lakes Initiative, help make sure that we clean our Great Lakes and make sure our Great Lakes are doing great. The Billion Tree Project, he talked about that countless times, helping bring in more oxygen, planting more trees. That was a global initiative that was going on. And, wanting to return to energy independence will not only help, our country, but it will help everyday Americans. There are plenty of people who, they can't afford gas right now. It's very high. It's gone down a little bit here in Wisconsin, but it's still high across the nation. And so I think, through Agenda 47, President Trump has laid out very solid policies when it comes to dealing with climate, dealing with the environment, and I think Generation Z, hopefully Republicans, and just Generation Z in general, will take a moment to actually take a look at those videos that President Trump has put out through Agenda 47 and recognize the work that he did during his administration.
Whitley, very quickly, I point well taken that despite some of the lack of the actual mention of climate, there are certainly plenty of environmental policies that Republicans, including young Republicans, can hang their hat on and be like, I'm proud of this. How, you talk a lot with younger Republicans.
I do.
Do you hear any frustration? I mean, I'm interested in your own point of view, but when you talk to the broader sort of group of young people who vote Republican, are they worried about the direction the party's going on climate, or do you feel like they're comfortable as well?
I do believe that there are some that are worried about climate change. Benji Backer is one of them. He's a good friend of mine. He wrote a book, The Conservative Environmentalist, and it reframes the conversation around climate change, making it less political. And I think that would be something that is beneficial for us all, because we all want to protect the planet. I think the problem comes with the priorities and where that is in alignment, because the truth is I'm worried more about my coins right now than the climate, because I need more of those. I need them to stay in my pockets. And so when it comes to the overall scheme, yes, we want to protect the planet. How we get there is going to be a little bit different from our counterparts, but I think where it comes in the list of priorities is probably one of the bigger issues.
It does seem like the two parties are starting to coalesce around at least one issue, and that's nuclear. So
yes.
More support for nuclear energy.
It's exciting to see.
You guys are all big support. I mean, obviously
Yes.
that's very low carbon emissions. You do have to deal with radioactive waste that never goes away. But other than that, so that's an area of potential bipartisanship.
Yeah, there's plenty of organizations that are really looking into it and educating people on it. Here locally in Wisconsin, one of those groups is the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum. So, I mean, there are plenty of groups that are, going across the country, and I think more people just have to be educated on it. It's, a thing that we've always done in the past, but it is an option, and we can have that healthy balance of coal, gas, natural oil, and everything, and that all mixed together with nuclear and moving
Peter,
forward.
Whitley, both also nuclear fans. Is that safe to say? Whitley?
I need to research. I've seen too much Aaron Brockovich. I don't know. I need to see some reports first before I'm 10 toes down. But I'm interested in anything that's healthy for Mother Earth.
Great. Okay. Well, we have a few more minutes. Let's talk just sort of voter demographics, and I think an increasingly emerging split between the young men and young women in the Republican Party. So young men, the Republican Party has actually done, I think, a very good job of moving people closer to the Republican Party. A lot of young men have come in. Young women have started to move away, actually, and that's been quite an interesting thing to see, I think, because historically Democrats have done quite well with young people generally, and seeing the young men fall off while the young women move further away has been sort of I think it's probably the biggest split between any of the demographics among the 18 to 29. Curious how you guys see that, why you think that's happening, why young women are moving away even as young men move much closer, whether this is a problem or an opportunity, and where you think the Republican Party, what you think the Republican Party should do, if anything, to address this gender gap among the young people when it comes to support for the GOP. Peter, go for it.
Beautiful. So it's interesting because in New York, we've actually seen an increase in teenage Republicans, and obviously you can't vote until you're 18, but there's a large number of high school age boys that are following American politics, trending more conservative in their views because they're following the impact of everything right now on their parents, right? The economy, public safety, depending on where you live, the migrant crisis in some cases. And I do think that has caused them to be a little bit more sympathetic or curious about the Republican Party, right? I think anybody that is young at that young age is curious about what an organization stands for or what a party stands for, right? And so they're learning about the Republican Party. It just so happens they've come in probably at one of the most interesting times in Republican politics with President Trump, who's been by and far the most unique Republican president we've ever had. So that's always stood out to me. But I do see, too, that there are glimmers of hope with the up-and-coming generation of young women. I know there's quite a margin there, but there are a lot of young women who are seeing similar things that these young men are seeing, and they're becoming more politically engaged. I think it all ultimately goes back to the future, right? And you had mentioned it earlier. Nobody wants to be the next generation of the endless war, right? I'm a millennial. I grew up with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan that lasted 20 years, right? Nobody wants to have the risk of us being in World War III. Everybody wants to have some sort of, economic stability in their future so they could settle down and raise a family. I think that's where those people are.
I'm going to go to Hilario for this one, but I also want to hear Whitley's point here. I think a lot of folks, when they look at the split between young men and young women, they do point to the Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court. So that was the rollback of abortion rights, rollback of Roe v. Wade. Do you guys see that as one of the driving forces for why women are moving away? And is there? I know there's a lot of debate in the GOP platform about abortion and how exactly they should talk about it. How do you guys think we should talk about it, and to what extent will that bring women back? Maybe.
I think it's an issue that does drive women away, but I think they have to understand that this is how I look at it. The original Supreme Court that enacted Roe v. Wade had no constitutional authority to do it. They are appointed, not elected officials. So now the power has returned back to the states, giving the people the opportunity to decide on what state will be a pro-life state, what state will be a pro-choice state. We saw recently with President Trump during the debate, he approved the decision of the Supreme Court approving the abortion pill. So I think his message has really gone towards more where the rest of the country is at. I'm a pro-life person, but I also believe in exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. Again, that's where most of the country is at, and we're starting to see that shift, kind of coming to the middle on that issue. But it allows for a discussion and a debate to actually happen to where is that exact cutoff point. And as a pro-life person, there has to be a cutoff point.
Let's close it out with a young Republican woman.
Yeah.
I think this is the ideal person to speak to this.
As someone sitting up here with the uterus and ovaries, I guess I will talk about this. I do believe that Dobbs was a reason for younger women to deviate from the Republican Party. I think that when you look at the My Body, My Choice and the pro-choice movement, it is a lot of young women you see out there, a lot of times more than some of the older women. What I think that you're going to see from the deviation is as it's gone back to the states, I think you're going to see women aligning with the Republican Party more and not seeing it as a federal issue and now a state's issue where they can then vote at their legislative level to either put those that they want in office that are going to support their choices, but not looking at it from the federal lens. And so I think that will actually help Republicans down the line because it won't be something that's on their back, which is why I believe it's not really mentioned in the platform anymore.
Do you, I mean, as a young Republican woman, how do you message to your peers, you know, look, I know you got some concerns, but you should still consider voting Republican. What's the right path for that?
I specifically message in urban communities, specifically the Black community. And my message to them is, you know, I'm a descendant of chattel slavery. My family came over here as property, and in the slave fields and on plantations, they were giving birth while being raped by their plantation owners. So at the end of the day, through the atrocities that have been faced in this country, we have consistently seen our people have their children. I'm here today because they chose life. And so it is not innate within us to want to terminate the life of our own children and our progeny. With that being said, I think the Republican Party needs to go from being pro-life to pro-livelihood and really understanding how to support the totality of that life, from adoption to resources surrounding infant and maternal mortality rate, and making sure that from womb to tomb, we're supporting life in all ways and through all resources.
Okay, well, I think we're going to have to leave it at that. We are out of time. Very quickly, just a roundup of the discussion. Obviously, everybody would like to see the temperature lowered in the wake of Saturday's shooting. Don't ban TikTok. Climate change is an issue, but the Republican platform is despite not saying the word, trying to solve it. And the gender gap is closable. We just need to message a little differently about it, is what I'm hearing. So I want to thank our panelists and thank everybody here and everybody on the live stream. And hope you guys have a great rest of your convention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
I know, I'm sorry.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm back. I'm Kevin Barron, the editorial director for Politico Live, with a programming change announcement. Unfortunately, Robert Kennedy Jr., who was scheduled to join us now, has had to reschedule due to all the chaos going on outside, and we're told he will be here hopefully some point later in the week. In the meantime, we'll have a special interlude and then be followed by Vivek Ramaswamy afterwards with Meridith McGraw from Politico for the conclusion of our programming today. We encourage everyone as well to keep watching on home, online, and sharing our hashtag Politico Conventions to be part of the conversation. But allow me to welcome to the stage for a special conversation Anne McElvoy, our executive editor for her global podcast, and John Harris, our global editor-in-chief. Thank you, everybody.
Hello, everyone. We've come to enliven your lunch. Something to go with the cheese. So we're going to resume our Power Play podcast recording with John Harris, known to all of you, our editor-in-chief. And here we go. This is how the magic happens. John Harris, welcome to Power Play.
Thank you, Anne.
So, Johnny, we're looking into an extraordinary week here. We've had that context, of course, of the dreadful attempted assassination of Donald Trump at the weekend. Only today, as we were preparing for this event, we learned that the classified documents case against the former president has been dismissed. Is it your sense that Trump's hand has been materially strengthened as the convention gets underway? For one reason, we could never have predicted, and another which just seems to fall in his favor for a number of reasons.
It certainly is my sense. I'd be hard-pressed to imagine somebody arguing the opposite, that he's not arriving in this at this convention with, as our colleague Jonathan Martin wrote this morning, for 8 years it's been the Republican Party in internal disarray and with an argument about Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Trump has unified the Democratic Party. And all its factions are completely aligned against him. That's where we've been. Right now it's flipped. This Republican Party is unified. Trump doesn't really face significant opposition within the party. Even the background conversation about, oh, I think he's his behavior is outlandish or he's terrible long-term for the Republican Party. You're not really hearing that anymore. Actually, this is so thoroughly Donald Trump's Republican Party. He's unified it, and of course the Democrats are in confusion, state of disarray, demoralization, because there's such widespread doubt within the party leadership about Joe Biden's ability to wage a successful campaign. That was a reality before this weekend. Of course, former President Trump coming out of that assassination attempt with a show of defiance, a show of strength. It's obviously thrilled his supporters here.
Let me throw a couple of thoughts to you from the Reince Preibus interview that we just conducted, and I think I saw you listening to it in the audience. A couple of things that struck me. One was how someone like Mr. Preibus, very experienced, been in the White House, knows Donald Trump through thick and thin, good and bad. He seemed to be suggesting that there could be a more unified message coming out of this. He even flirted with a phrase, "Make America One Again."
Yeah.
Which he, you know, the way he said it sounded to me like he didn't say it by accident. Can you imagine that being a trial balloon for an alternative to MAGA? Could it be on hats?
Well, you've got to count me in the skeptical category for now, and
That's why
I think I'm going to stay in the skeptical category. I need a lot of evidence of that over a sustained period of time. I would note that it's not just a former party chairman Reince Preibus who's saying that. Former President Trump himself said that in his interview with the Washington Examiner this morning, that he's recrafting his convention message, that he's trying to have a message of unity.
So what makes you skeptical?
Because first off, that's the instinctual reaction. You know, I remember all the way back to you know, one of the greatest tragedies in recent generations, the 9/11 attacks. People say, oh, well, this is finally what we need to sort of hit the breaker, allow people to kind of stop arguing as they had all through the 90s. And unify as a country, and that lasted for a short period of time, but then of course we reverted to our standard positions. People thought the pandemic would make all our political divisions seem less pronounced and put the emphasis on national unity, reconciliation, collaboration to meet the public health emergency. Of course, we saw that in fact the pandemic was actually very effective fuel for the fire for having continuing this great national argument, these ideological and cultural divisions which have totally infused our politics for the past generation. So yeah, and then the final reason I would be skeptical is that it's just not Donald Trump's style. He has gotten to where he is with a politics of conflict, by even a politics of contempt, marshaling the contempt that obviously many Americans feel toward certain toward the establishment, toward politics as usual. So whatever, President Trump's going to have a transformation at age 78 or so. It's maybe, but.
Yeah, he's off to join the Peace Corps shortly.
I would note, it wouldn't surprise me if in this convention he gives it his best effort to hit those notes on the keyboard. The reason being, there would be very good political logic to do so. President Trump has been fantastic at energizing a Republican coalition, including lots of people who aren't going to vote for a Mitt Romney type or a Jeb Bush type, but they'll enthusiastically come out to vote for Donald Trump. He's a great mobilizer. The problem with that kind of mobilization politics, it also mobilizes the other side. So his great challenge, it seems to me, headed into the general election is to see whether he can regain lost ground in the suburbs, among women, among college-educated voters.
So we were going to have the VP candidate announcement shortly. By the time this podcast is heard, that will be out there. How much difference do you think it makes with that famously scratchy relationship, particularly towards the end and around the January the 6th uprising with Mike Pence. Donald Trump's not a person who seems to find relationship with deputies easy.
No, you tend to have a short half-life if you are going into Donald Trump's circle and thinking that you can somehow moderate him or influence him in one way or the other. Former Vice President Pence, who's, by the way, is not backing, last I knew, is not backing his former boss, but there's dozens of others who are in that situation, but there's dozens more who are willing to give it a try and clearly would be ready to staff a second administration or to become vice president.
What kind of vice president do you think he would want to have, I mean, in terms of function, not identity, in this second run at the White House? Interesting what Mr. Preibus was saying on the podcast earlier, that he thought it would be more effective or factual, almost as if he thought that Donald Trump had sort of CEO kind of aspirations.
Yeah.
I was not sure about that. But then again, he does know him well. He seemed to be suggesting that he had learned a lot from that first term. Your thoughts?
You know what, if we step away from this choice that Donald Trump presumably has made and is, as we're speaking up here, and is set to announce, as you point out, the decision will be known by the time most people listen to this. And certainly there's an enormous buzz going on right moment that it would be Senator J.D. Vance from Ohio. If we're wrong about that, I'll just say that was the buzz at the time. We didn't report it.
Never wrong for long, I
never
think.
Never wrong for long, exactly.
This is our rule on this show.
But if you step away from this choice, Anne, and we'll just look at the choice that any major party presidential nominee has to make when they're picking a vice president, there's basically two models historically. One is balance. I'm from the Northeast, so I want somebody from a southern state. I'm a white male, a female would be a big draw. I'm seen as on one side of an ideological argument in the party, therefore let's get somebody who represents a different side. That's balance. And for most of our history, that's, at least throughout the 20th century, that was typically what presidential nominees were going for, was a measure of balance. Use this nomination to unify the disparate elements of a party. But the other model is reinforcement, somebody that can underline the characteristics of that you're trying to present to
Which
voters,
feels a bit more
and
Donald Trump.
amplify the leadership of the principle. Well, I would say in 2016, Donald Trump chose balance, right? Mike Pence is nothing like him. He has strong ties to evangelical voters, which of course Donald Trump didn't do. It seems like this time he wants somebody that's going to reinforce. It's a reinforcement. You know, as an example of a reinforcement pick, when Bill Clinton back, it's now 32 years ago, but he picked Al Gore. Basically, they were twins in some sense, both young, moderate Democrats from the South. It was a way of reinforcing. So a different example would be, I'd say, the one that Donald Trump made is a classic.
Did you notice that Reince Preibus sort of doubled down when I asked him about faith and Donald Trump, on this idea that Donald Trump had many people of faith around him in the White House? Also, that's what the former chief of staff is a religious man himself. But there's politics in this. This is not only about one's relationship with the Almighty, is it? It did seem to me to be, call me cynical, but it did seem to me to suggest that he felt that Donald Trump did need to lean into that more. It's not only evangelicals, but people of faith more broadly. It's interesting, our own Jonathan Martin is ridiculously, almost like surprised when he said he was so interested in this question. Why does it matter so much?
Well, I think the reason Jonathan Martin's interested in this is because he sees a great contradiction. It's the Republican Party, one of its essential pillars is faith-based voters, and at least until he arrived in the White House, Donald Trump was seen as an emphatically secular figure. He is not somebody whose politics come out of this Christian conservative movement that's been so important to the Republican Party. So noting that tension or that contradiction is interesting. I would say one of the remarkable achievements of President Trump over 8 years is that group of Christian conservatives that was quite wary of him in the nominating contest of 2015 and 2016, and even wary of him at the start of his presidency, has now coalesced firmly behind him. The only reason he needs to be worry a little bit about shoring up that is we've seen from former President Trump, and we've seen from the official Republican platform moving away on the question on an abortion rights question. Most people in the Republican Party over the past generation, really 2 generations, have been in favor of a national ban on the right to abortion. We've seen that be very...
Which is not the position now.
Well, we've seen it very unpopular, even in conservative states like Kansas, when you put that question to voters. What President Trump has said is like, look, I want this question before the states. It was, in fact, my Supreme Court that put this question where it belongs, to the states. He's not in favor of a national position on abortion. He thinks that's the politically prudent place to be for a general election, but that's a big change over where the Republican Party has been for the last generation or 2.
Let's turn then to the position of President Biden. I would say it's the common wisdom around here, and it may be also you do tend to end up a bit in a bubble at the respective conventions, that this is all going so great for Donald Trump, what could possibly go wrong? And I'm going to invoke Harris's law, as in John Harris's law.
It's my law.
You've got a law, yeah.
Well,
You've got a law,
they're all over the place. I keep them in my top drawer.
We've been collecting them for a rainy day at Politico. And one thing, because I remember someone saying something like this, and you said, but this changes very fast. You don't seem to be someone who really believes that elections are sealed way out from the date when the voters go to the polls. And that struck with me at the moment, because I think if we went round, not just here, not just supporters, but observers, would say, it is going his way, it's Trump 2.0. If you loved Trump 1.1, you're going to love Trump 2.2. If you didn't, you're really not. Does Harris's law then still apply, that there could be a reversal of fortune?
Well, Anne, I've got to reconcile my laws, or maybe just get out of the law business altogether. But I will say, there's a couple of things I believe. It is true that generally the structural forces that are going to affect a general election, they're pretty well solidified by this point in the year. Of course, elections are won or lost at the margin, so even having the structural fundamentals doesn't mean that the outcome is set. But there are clearly some fundamentals in this election year. This was true before the debate, and it was true before this the terrible assassination attempt, that the fundamentals of this race seem to be tilting toward Donald Trump. That was largely due to clear weakening of President Biden's 2020 coalition, and really casting doubt that he would be able to reassemble that coalition. So that is both those. That reality has been compounded, underlined, if you will, by the debate and by the assassination attempt. So that's true. There's some things that are pretty well baked in. It's also true, here's my other law, is that life is full of surprises, and it is folly.
This is an amendment.
Codicil, yes, and I can advise and extend. Also, it's just long experience. Very often the conventional wisdom, what everybody thinks, particularly what everybody in our business thinks, it's often BS, right? We perceive things that maybe aren't really true, or we extrapolate events out into the future as though it's a continuous line. That's not life. Life is full of surprises. It's never a solid line. It's a curved line. It's a jagged line. So there are, I don't know what they're going to be, but there are yet more surprises in front of us.
And final thought perhaps on President Biden. What should he do now? We've heard those messages that he was putting out. I think he was very quick. His team had him very quickly into making calls with Donald Trump at the weekend, calling him by his first name, which I don't think we've heard. You know, one doesn't get the sense that they'd be natural golf buddies. But you know, that was a sort of a conciliatory tone. Then we had the call to step back, to cool down the debate. Everybody seems to be out there doing that one. But in fairness to President Biden, I think he said it with some genuine feeling. You reflected earlier that he's been in a difficult position inside his own party. Does this strengthen or weaken him, and how should he respond?
To the events of
to the events of the weekend.
The past weekend, do they strengthen Joe Biden? I don't know. I don't think it is possible to. I mean, you have to recognize that the voices who are expressing skepticism, there's been a certain number of them within the Congress, or in some cases, some governors within the state. Relatively few saying publicly Joe Biden should not be the nominee, but those public voices are multiplied by many times over if you let people speak on background and get a sense of what they really think. There's enormous skepticism within the Democratic Party whether Joe Biden is the best prospect for the party to win the general election. Enormous skepticism of his vitality to get elected or to serve for 4 years. That can't. I don't know how that could be waved away because it wasn't the result of a bad night.
Okay, let me try this on you.
It reflected the reality of who he is at age coming up on 82.
Sorry. One way it could be waved away is simply that the clock runs out on those who want him to go. And
that's right. I do think that this event,
and what is that
it does sort of run down the clock. You know, the later in the summer it goes, the more people will say, like, well, it's too late to make a change.
When is it too late?
I don't know. I mean, like he'll become the official nominee before the arrival in Chicago. But even at that point, he can always withdraw as the official nominee. Like, I don't think it's. I don't know that it's ever really as a practical legal matter. It's never too late. I think there are some people who say, well, as a political matter, it's already quite late.
So Harris's Third Amendment,
you know,
it's never entirely too late.
Well, I mean, especially if there were sustained polls, if there were a bunch of polls that came out in coming days that showed the president far behind, and in particular, he's currently a little bit behind in the 7, 8 swing states that really matter. If those were to widen, you'd have people say, like, we've got to make a change. Of course, the rejoinder to that would be like, well, of course they widen. There's always they always favor the nominee from the party in the wake of his or her convention, and of course there's an outgrowth of support for former President Trump because of the shooting. But then, if say not the first wave of polls, but the second and third, we get into late July, we get into early August. I don't care how late it is. There are going to be prominent Democrats, certainly privately, but probably increasingly publicly, that say we've got to make a change. It's nothing against President Biden. He's been a successful president, but he's not the person at his age and in his current condition to wage the fight successfully in the fall. I think that would remain true up until Labor Day.
Well, we've got to have you back, and particularly, I'm sure we'll have you back at.
And all my laws will be shown that they're all rendered obsolete.
John Harris laws
and they're,
will be announced
BS.
at the Democratic Party convention. I'm keeping track of them here as the legal clerk. What are you looking forward to this week in Milwaukee?
You know, most conventions, there aren't lots of surprises, right? The role of convention planners typically is to have as little suspense as possible, that they've seen that is in their interest. But in this case, we have a fair amount of suspense. Some of it obviously very unfortunate that we wouldn't wish for, but some of it just old-fashioned political suspense of the sort we're going to presumably find out about later today. Who's the nominee? We honestly don't know. Politics is serious business, but it's not all serious business, and we can enjoy the spectacle of it. And especially given that in 2020 we didn't really have conventions, to return to the old-fashioned spectacle of a political convention, even under these very trying times for the nation, there's an element of exhilaration about it.
That's why we have Politico, isn't it?
Yeah.
Listen, John Harris, thank you very much indeed for joining me here at the Grill on the Power Play podcast. And see you again soon.
Thank you, Anne.
Cheers.
Please welcome Politico's national political correspondent, Meridith McGraw, and businessman and former 2024 presidential candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
So good to see you. Well, welcome everyone. It is a pleasure to sit down today with former Republican presidential candidate, author, entrepreneur, and host of the Truth podcast, Vivek Ramaswamy. And Vivek, I know we were talking backstage. The first time I met you, it was shortly after you announced your presidential run in 2023. And since then, you've campaigned all over the country. You've made your case on the debate stage. You've competed in Iowa. You endorsed Trump. And now you have become one of his top supporters in his campaign for the White House. And now we're in Milwaukee, where Trump is poised to be the Republican nominee, and what feels like a historic and incredibly fraught moment. The country feels more divided than ever between red and blue, and Trump just survived an assassination attempt during the rally in Pennsylvania. So just to start our discussion, I wanted to get your thoughts on this moment that we're in and what just happened.
It was stunning on Saturday. I think it'll be one of those moments that our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will read about in their history books. And I hope what they're saying then is that this was a moment when the United States of America turned a page from a toxic chapter in its national history. And that Donald Trump, when he went back for that second term, was ready to fight fire with water. Not fire with fire alone, but fire with water, and actually extinguish a lot of the difficulties that Biden claimed to want to address. He said he ran on a platform to unite the country. We wouldn't be where we are if he had done it. But blaming the other side, that's the easy path, to maybe take the path less traveled. And I think the path less traveled is to say, this is who we are and what we stand for. One of the things I saw during the campaign was that I do think this myth of national division is really just that. It's a myth, actually. When you travel to real America, not media, stock corridors, not political conferences, but real America, most Americans share the same basic values in common. And one of those values is, I miss this, but it's an America that I miss, where we can all get together at the dinner table, disagree vehemently, vigorously, debate each other hard, to say that I disagree like hell with you, but we will still be friends at the end of it. And I think that's an opportunity for both parties, but I'll speak for the Republican Party, to say, you know what, we are up against an ideology. We are in a war for the survival of the country, but the enemy in that war is an ideology, not our fellow citizens. The enemies are not Democrats, that we see our fellow neighbors as citizens while still engaging in that vigorous disagreement. And so if this is that kind of turning point, then let that at least be a silver lining out of what was a near national tragedy. And was a tragedy. One life was lost. It was a father of 2 kids. I'm a father of 2 sons myself. That was a travesty. But had that bullet taken a different path by a matter of centimeters, I don't think it would just be President Trump's life, but really the future of our country that we would be suffering. And so God has given that chance. It's up to us to step up and take it. And I hope people across the political spectrum do.
After the shooting, you had said, quote, first they sued him, then they prosecuted him, then they tried to take him off the ballot. The only thing more tragic than what just happened is that, if we're being honest, it wasn't totally a shock. Biden's inevitable ritual condemnation of political violence today, when it comes, will be insufficient and irrelevant. No amount of verbiage changes the toxic national climate that led to this tragedy. Why did you think that was an important message? And we're also hearing from Republicans that have placed the blame on President Biden and said that Democrats bear responsibility here for the attack. And there are lots of conspiracy theories going around on the internet. What is your response to people within your own party? And
so I'll say something about this, Meredith. I hope the national unity is the outcome that in the long run comes of this near tragedy. But it's not going to be a fake unity. And I don't want it to be a fake unity because that's not going to last. My first response was anger. Anger because of what I wrote there, which is that actually the only thing worse than what happened was the fact that, if we're really being honest about it, was not a total shock to anybody, given where we are. So I think we have to be honest and recognize that we are angry, and for good reason, but to channel that anger for a productive purpose. It's got to be both of those things. We're not going to modulate. I don't think we should modulate on our principles that guide us. In the American Revolution, we're looking at an American flag here. It was fought for radical ideas of self-governance, of free speech. The idea that the people we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government. Those are radical ideals, and I don't think we should compromise on the ideals. But I think what we need to do better is instead separate our debates about that ideology, keep them as vigorous as they should be, to separate that from seeing our actual individual fellow Americans as anything other than our fellow citizens, and certainly not as our enemies. And I think we got to do both of those things at once, because the one risk is, of course, you kind of throw fuel on the fire and continue to inflame even worse in the future. God forbid. I hope that's the worst thing that happens this presidential cycle, is what happened on Saturday night. I think the other risk, though, is it ends up being this fake superficial moment that passes. I actually think that's the more likely risk. And I don't want it to be that. I want it to be a culture of continuing to be able to butt heads and do it vigorously without seeing the other individually as the enemy. I don't want to spend too much time bashing Democrats here in the spirit of what I just said. I think as it relates to Biden, he's in a bit of a tough spot, because his entire message has been centered on Trump's existential threat to democracy. And I think some of the histrionics around that have been unhelpful. Now, either what is he going to do? Either double down on that? I hope and expect he won't. But if not, there really isn't a campaign message. I think it would be better for the country if we had two presidential candidates, one for the Republicans, one for the Democrats, who were fully capable of leading this country, but had differing visions on policy. And we could actually have that debate as Americans. That could bring us together. But we don't control what the Democratic Party does. What I think we do control is what happens here. And I hope this Republican convention centers less on worrying about Democratic shenanigans and worrying more about who we are, not just as Republicans, but as Americans. And if we do that, I think not only are we going to be successful in November, I think we stand a good chance of, dare I say, reuniting the country.
We've heard from a lot of people that they've changed their speech for the RNC. Have you made any adjustments in light of what's happened?
So I tend to not give, as you probably know from my campaign trail, too many pre-scripted speeches anyway, but certainly Saturday changed my own attitude and perspective, absolutely. How could it not? I mean, think about if history had been written just a couple of centimeters differently, a couple milliseconds differently, what a different place we would be in right now. And as much as, and we do, mourn the loss of life that day, I think we can't sweep that under the rug. That was a tragedy. But as much as we mourn that loss, I am grateful that this country averted what could have been a true, lasting national disaster that we might not have recovered from. But that's not the world we're in. And so I do feel some sense of responsibility, having been given this chance. If divine providence extends America a hand, it's up to Americans to step up and actually seize it. And I think that's the moment we're in. And I know that Donald Trump is going to be up to that occasion. The fellow leaders across this convention who I've talked to already, I think are in a place of deep reflection about the future of our country as well. I don't want it to be the fake unity. I don't want it to be just verbiage. I want us to stay every bit as committed to our own ideals as we were before Saturday, but to do it with the focus on what are we actually running to, not who are we trying to individually defeat out of existence.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I know we are all anticipating is Donald Trump to announce who his running mate will be. Right
Apparently going to happen very soon, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
very soon. Right before he got on stage, I had some breaking news that Senator Marco Rubio and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum were both called and told that they will not be Trump's running mate. I wanted to know who you might be pulling for.
Well, look, I think that there were only 3 picks heading into this that were reported in the news, and so that leaves certainly my good friend J.D. Vance. He's a good friend.
Yes.
He is somebody. So it hasn't been announced yet. So we'll see who it ends up being. But he's somebody I've known for over a decade. We were actually law school classmates, and funny enough, we bonded over watching Cincinnati Bengals games together. We grew up probably 10, 15 minutes from where I lived through the time I was in kindergarten. Wasn't far from where he grew up as well. And we didn't know each other then, but we got to be good friends in law school. And funny enough, though, that we were probably among the few lone conservatives there. We didn't even really know much about each other's political ideologies. We just knew that we were rooting for the failing Bengals, which was actually a good basis for a friendship. And then now here we are, you know, a little over 10 years later, and it's a different world that he and I are both in. I think he would be, we'll see what the announcement is, but I think he would be an excellent vice president to President Trump. And I just think we need more people like that in our politics, who are energetic, intelligent, but also have a clear-eyed ideology. I think that's a good thing, actually. He's one of the few people in American politics who has a clear vision of why he's there and a sense of mission and a positive ideology for the future of the country, and I respect that, and I think he'll be missed where he is now in the Senate, where I think we need more of those fighters, but I think he will make for an outstanding vice president.
So if it is Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, the governor gets to appoint the replacement. And so far we've heard that Governor Mike DeWine's office he's declined to weigh in on what factors would drive his decision making, which leads me to you. You're from Ohio. You are around the same age as J.D. Vance. As you said, you went to school with him. You're both young, for the MAGA movement. Would you be interested in taking Vance's spot in the Senate?
So look, as I said, I think JD is going to be a great vice president. One of the only real negative of choosing him as vice president, and I mean this as a compliment to him, is that he does leave in his wake a big vacuum in the Senate. I think we need more people like him in American politics. President Trump and I have had some great conversations about the future. We've talked about a wide range of possibilities of how I could have an impact on the country. But if asked to serve in that role, if JD is indeed the vice president, we're going a couple steps ahead here. We don't know who the vice president is yet. But if JD is selected as the vice president, I think he would be a great choice. And if I were asked to serve, then I would strongly consider it. And I would want to have an open conversation with President Trump about where I would be able to have the biggest impact on helping the country. And so that's what my off-the-cuff response would be.
Have you had any conversations with Trump or with Governor DeWine about potentially filling that role?
No.
None at all?
Not broadly, no, certainly not about that role. I think that broadly, the conversations with President Trump that I have had is mostly related to ways that he and I both want to change the country for the better. I do believe that we have a historic opportunity to fix the immigration issue in this country once and for all. That's something I was incredibly passionate about in the presidential campaign. As the kid of legal immigrants, I also believe in the rule of law, and the mass wave of illegal immigration is as much the problem as it is a long-run fix that we require in our immigration system. At the same time, probably my top passion and focus during the presidential campaign and even afterwards has been to shut down the fourth branch of government, the administrative state that wields far too much power today. Now, there are elements to doing that. That's a multimodal effort. Some of that is going to come from the executive branch. Some of that is going to need to be groundwork laid from Capitol Hill as well in changing the way the budgeting process works, what sort of authorities the president does or doesn't have to spend the money that has necessarily been appropriated for different departments. So that's really my passion going forward, is really tackling that administrative bureaucracy, the managerial class in the three-letter government agencies. I think there are ways to do that through the executive branch, and I think that there are necessary ways that are going to be required to do that through Congress and through the Senate as well. And so for me, I'm going to keep an open mind, but in terms of issues that I'm foremost focused on, it is to not reshape the administrative state, but really to dismantle the administrative state. And I think that's going to be something that unites Americans on the left and right, to say that no matter who you vote for, it should at least be the people who we vote for who actually run the government, not unelected bureaucrats.
That's been something that's been talked about in Project 2025, the right-wing playbook curated by the Heritage Foundation that a lot of Trump associates have been a part of. It's gotten a lot of attention and a lot of criticism, of course, from Democrats and from President Biden. And a CNN review last week found at least 140 people who worked in the Trump administration have had a hand in crafting this. Trump says he has no idea who's behind the plan, but I am curious what you make of Project 2025 and some of the policy prescriptions that have been put forward
So I
there.
care less about labels or which groups are doing what. I like to get my hands into the content of what a given policy is, agree or not. And the parts of Project 2025 and the parts of other efforts too. There have been a lot of efforts, not just in the last few years, but dating back decades. There are other parallel policy think tanks that have been focused on this issue too. But anybody who is focused on deconstructing the managerial bureaucracy, the federal bureaucracy, the regulatory state, the idea that you have unelected bureaucrats who are issuing binding edicts that were never voted for by the actual people of this country, I think it's a good development. One of the things that's different now from Trump's first term, and Trump won on the first term with a drain the swamp message, and for a good reason. But one of the things that's different now from 2017 is we also have a Supreme Court constitutional backdrop that actually would allow a willing president to go much further than he might have been able to go 10 years ago in dismantling the power of that bureaucracy. West Virginia versus EPA in 2022. I personally think it's one of the most important Supreme Court cases of our lifetime that say that certain of these regulations are inherently unconstitutional if they relate to major policy questions. You have Loper, you have Jarkissi, both from this cycle in the Supreme Court. That is a major legal toolkit that gives the executive, the President of the United States, great authority to rein in the power of the executive. And this is where I think some of the media reporting on this has missed the plot, frankly. They worry in some of the media histrionics, if I'm being honest, about concentrating power in the executive. Whereas in fact, the real problem is the overconcentration of power in the executive branch, in the administrative state. So a lot of these efforts that we're talking about at deconstructing the administrative state, it's not about concentrating executive authority. It's about giving back executive authority to the people of the country and say that Congress should actually be the one making the laws. There's a distance that the president can go. There's also going to be necessary action on this required of Capitol Hill. Congressmen and senators stepping up to that challenge and frankly taking more responsibility for writing those laws. Part of what we've seen is an abdication of that duty, where a lot of legislators, congressmen and senators in both parties included, saying, okay, I don't want to get into those details because I might be held politically accountable, so I'm going to write a vague statute and kick it over to the administrative state. That's wrong and a big contributor to the problem as well. So again, that's the top problem I'm focused on in a lot of my scholarship. I have a book coming out later this year. Part of the book tackles this topic. And whether it's through the executive branch or another way, that is something that I intend to remain focused on. I think will be positive for the revival of our country.
So what role would that be, though?
Yeah.
What would that look like in
Well, look, as I said, there's a lot of possibilities, and let's even, there's a lot that's going to play out even in the coming hours, if not the coming days. And so, look, I intend to have an open conversation with President Trump. We've discussed a lot of possibilities, and whatever it is, my litmus test is going to be what allows me to have maximal positive impact on this country. I don't come from the world of politics. I come from the world of business, but one of the lessons I did learn very early on and that stuck with me and that I share with young people who've asked for advice as well is it takes about as much effort to do something really small and do it well as it does to do something big and to do it well. And so in the short time that we're given, I would rather focus on whatever the biggest challenges that I'm able to take on and have an impact on using my own skill sets to help save the country. That's what I'm interested in. But for me right now, my top passion and area of interest is really taking aim at dismantling that fourth branch of government, the regulatory state, the overgrowth of the administrative state. There are some other individual policy issues that are near and dear to my heart, like the immigration issue, and those are important to me as well. But my top area of focus is how do we actually restore self-governance by dismantling the regulatory state.
Would you be interested in a cabinet position in a second Trump administration?
I would consider a wide range of, I mean, President Trump and I have had a wide range of conversations, and whether it's going into the administration, you raised on late-breaking possibilities, other avenues. Mm-hmm. Look, I do think that JD's seat will leave big shoes to be filled, and I think that senators like him are rare to come by, so we'll see what the next few days hold in store. But regardless, I'm less focused on what individual title I have or position I fill, and more maximizing the biggest impact I can have on what I call shutting it down. We can't, and this is an interesting, maybe to get a little bit less about me and my position, but more on the future direction of the country and even the conservative movement. This is going to be one of those decisions we're going to have to make as a movement in terms of which way we lean. I think with President Trump's nomination on Thursday, that marks the end of if it didn't already, end of an era in the conservative movement that rejects, I think, a lot of the neoliberal dogmas of maximizing the size of the economic pie for its own sake without regard to other factors like national identity and the prosperity of American workers and manufacturers and our national interests and our foreign policy. But in the question of where we go from here, I think there's a tilt that could go in a national protectionist direction that says, hey, we want to use the regulatory state to do good, to advance the interests of American workers and manufacturers rather than the neoliberal dogmas of yesterday. That's, I think, one direction things could go. I think there's another direction that says, you know what? The right answer is not to redirect the regulatory state. The right answer is actually to shut it down. And that's what I call more of a national libertarian view. And I think there's room for both of those in the America First movement. I think both of those exist within the America First movement today. But certainly my view is that the more we go in that direction of shutting down and dismantling the nanny state, we're not trying to create a conservative alternative to the nanny state. We want to dismantle the nanny state. We don't want to create a conservative alternative to the current regulatory state. We want to dismantle the regulatory state. That's, I think, more the direction we need to go. That's certainly one of the things that animated my candidacy, and even after my candidacy for president, when I think about having an impact on the country, that's the direction I would like to take things, whether that's from within the executive branch, whether it's from the Senate, whether it's from a different vantage point, even at the state level. You could think about this too. The fourth branch of government is alive and well, unfortunately, in nearly every state government across the nation as well. And so that's what I believe, is that's how we save the country from the overgrowth of managerial bureaucracy, of unelected bureaucrats issuing public policy by fiat. And however I'm able to maximize my impact on that, that's what I think the next step holds in store.
What have some of the ideas for you Trump has had?
Yeah, I want to be respectful of the conversations I've had with him. One of the things I love about Donald Trump, and I am wired the same way, is we're very candid, right? We don't play coy. And I think that even on policy questions, right? He and I discussed shortly after I exited the race the reason for being opposed to a central bank digital currency. His first words to me were not what many politicians would say if you talk about a seemingly esoteric issue like that, which is pretending to know what they're talking about there. He said, what the hell is that? And why are they for it? Which is a good question to ask, because he didn't want to just take my opposition for it. He said, well, why are the people who are for it? And eventually he, through the course of a week of studying this issue, by the end of that week, came out publicly with a position that he adopted publicly on stage in New Hampshire, said that I'm opposed to the creation of a central bank digital currency in the United States because I think it's a threat to the liberty of Americans. And that really gave me a lens into President Trump that I didn't have from the media impressions of him, or even the short interactions we would have had beforehand, where I do think this is a man who cares about the best ideas actually winning for the country. This is a man who actually cares about not just covering his own issues, but learning ever more about how he's going to help make America great again. I think he means it when he says it. And so most of our discussions have actually been on substance. I'll often share my perspectives with him on either policy or on the vision for the country. And I think he has alluded to a lot of different avenues that he sees, and we're going to continue that conversation.
Well, I was just informed that while we were sitting here, Donald Trump has picked Senator J.D. Vance.
You kidding me? Right here? Okay.
As vice president. right now, while we are sitting
Is that
here.
right? There it is. I see it. Well, I'm glad to see it. I actually messaged JD earlier today offering him, it sounded like the winds were pointing in that direction.
Yes.
And I had offered him my preliminary congratulations, and I think he will be an outstanding vice president, actually. I think he's not going to be a good vice president. He's going to be an outstanding vice president. I think President Trump and our country will be lucky to have him. I will certainly do everything in my power to make sure the Trump-Vance ticket is successful. I want to think about this, but I'm inclined to say this could be the single most formidable political ticket in my lifetime. And I want to see them succeed at a scale that not only makes the Republican Party thrive, but makes the country thrive. And I think we need more people like JD in American politics. So I'm very happy for him and excited for everything that's ahead. And it's funny to me, just reacting to the news in real time, and thinking about the context in which he and I knew each other, both Cincinnatians, Southwest Ohio natives, and both people who, did through different journeys. We were classmates in law school. Never imagined that this is where he and I would both be. We were reminiscing on that a little bit, and here we are, just a little over 10 years later. And I am very proud of him and his whole family. Usha is a good friend of Apurva's and mine as well, and the way they're raising their boys and our boys are similar age is just something that gives me great happiness to see him hopefully impact this country as much as I know he can. How did Vance respond when you texted him this morning? We have a very friendly relationship, and the thing I like about him is he's not like a lot of other politicians. Right? We're able to really. There's not a lot of formality between us. We've known each other for a while. Yeah, we know each other really well. But I think he's that way even with people he works with in the other contexts, and I'm kind of wired similarly as well. Is let's just take the artifice off a little bit. He and I have our shades of differences in vision for the country. And I love that we're actually able to talk about that with each other and push each other. He's pushed me and I pushed him in some ways that allow us, I think, to each be the sharpest versions of ourselves. And I just think we need more of that in American politics. Of course, we agree on most things. But actually, the stuff we end up talking about is areas where we actually have daylight between us. And I just think bringing that thoughtful culture into our politics is going to be great now, not just at the level of the Senate, but the near highest level of office in the United States. And I think he's going to be an outstanding vice president. I really do. What does he bring to the ticket as a vice president? Well, I mean, I'm not a political analyst, so I'm not. I leave that to the professionals. But I think President Trump made a smart choice where, a choice like JD, I think he makes that. Certainly, my opinion is that the reason to pick JD is he would be an excellent vice president, and God forbid if that moment necessitates itself an excellent president. I really do think he would make a good president and leader of the country. But I think politically, just to state the obvious, he is somebody who is an American dream story. That's very personal to me. My parents came here as immigrants over 40 years ago with no money. I've founded multi-billion-dollar companies, married my wife, who's lived her own version of the American dream. JD's wife has lived a similar American dream to my wife, and JD didn't come from standard political means or business backgrounds, and yet has succeeded at the highest levels in this country. That's awesome, right? That is an American dream that isn't alive and well in this country right now to a lot of Americans. It's alive and hanging on for life support. And I just think that he is somebody who embodies that that's still possible in the United States of America. And I think our message as a party, I think President Trump's message, I think a lot of JD's message is that we want to make that possible for more Americans, more attainable for hardworking people who play by the rules and get ahead the right way to be able to live a good life with dignity and with respect and without condescension. And I think that that's something intangible he brings to the ticket that you're not going to necessarily see in some sort of analysis that here's the voting block he brings along. But in terms of the overall character of his own story and his own journey, but to combine that with an authentic message that he delivers as well as the best of them, I think that is going to be a real value add to the ticket to win in November. And I hope and expect an even greater value add to leading the country as a vice president. Perfect. Yeah. Well, with that, we will wrap up today's Politico CNN Grill. Vivek, thank you for your time. Thank you. And any, message to your friend as he's about to... To JD? Yeah. What will I say? You're a hell of a father. You're a good friend. And if you're as good of a vice president as you are a father to your kids, a husband to your wife, and a senator representing our state, then our country is going to be better off for it. And I wish you well. So proud of you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Good
Thank
to see you too.
Please welcome Politico Media Group CEO, Goli Sheikh Slami.
Sorry, was just saying hello and goodbye to Vivek Ramaswamy. So thank you, everyone. This is the end of our event for today. And as we were all here, President Trump announced that J.D. Vance would be his vice president. And Steve Daines started the morning by saying that this is a 12-year pick and not a 4-year pick. So now we can all go away with that. And I think tomorrow will be another day filled with news. And we'll start again in the morning with a great series of conversations, starting up with Linda McMahon first thing, I believe, around 11 o'clock tomorrow. So thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you.